Welcome to Sexually Charged Radio here on 93.3 FM, CFRU. I am Ruthie, and my co-host today is not Thomas. My co-host today is...
Sarah.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear it. I am traveling. I'm in the United States right now, so Thomas and I negotiated the open relationship of our radio show hosting, and Thomas said that I could go ahead and host a radio show without him, and that made me happy. And then I said, oh, Thomas, I hope you host radio shows without me too, and then we'll share excitement back and forth. So I'm here with Sarah, and we have been talking we've been deciding like what we will talk about, but not letting ourselves or each other say very much about it all so that we could capture it fresh. So I recently was, I'm not currently in Kentucky with Sarah, but I was recently in Kentucky doing a training, and all these great questions came up. And some other questions were asked more generally in a more social setting later. And, you know, one of them was a very foundational question. And I thought, you know what, if this foundational question is lingering in people's minds, it should be addressed. And I think that it's one of those questions that to say it out loud, you would have to be careful who you say it to. Because,
I agree.
Because it could be rude, or you might be made fun of for not knowing the answer already. But there's only one way to learn, and on this show, our co-hosts make tokens of ourselves and try to answer questions in loving ways. So I do want to start this with the preface to anyone who might be wondering foundational questions, or even less foundational questions about any kind of minority group. It is not that minority group's job to educate you, and they probably members of that group have already written about whatever question you have, so you can always, I would start by Googling it, which might be how you found this episode.
I agree.
Yes. So I just don't, we volunteer for it, so we're happy to do it, but we are not volunteering on behalf of all people who can answer this question. Sarah, before we give the question, I think we should do an icebreaker and introduction. That makes everybody wonder what's going on. So gender pronoun check. I use they exclusively. What pronouns for you?
She.
Thank you. And do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, or would you like to be a mystery?
I think at this point I prefer to be a mystery.
All right.
That sounds intriguing.
All right. Isn't it, the world is a better place with a mystery left in it, so I hear. So what I'm wondering for you is, what's the best sexual mistake you ever made?
The best sexual mistake I ever made? Wow.
Yeah, because people don't talk about sexual mistakes being a positive ever, but they certainly can be. There's a look of deliberation on your face. There's a hand on the chin, thinker style. We are not intoxicated, but we do have drinks in front of us.
We do. I might need drinks just to refresh my memory. I'm trying to think.
To get back to that mistake place.
Well, to get back to the mistake place where it ended up being a positive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we've all had the mistakes that were like, oh, but...
Meaning a not so positive mistake, yes.
Right. You might have stumped me on
Really?
this.
I wish the audience could see your contemplative smile. So I'm trying to think of, maybe, I'm not going to name any names. I think that's a good rule in general for this episode. But I certainly have started longer-term relationships by being sexual with someone that I didn't necessarily intend to be sexual with, or to have a longer-term relationship in the beginning. So in a way that was probably a mistake, but a really good mistake at the same time. So I'm thinking of that. So when I ask someone a question, I use their answer time to think of my answer. So I didn't get that yet. How about you?
It's interesting that you say that, because when you said sexual mistake, I was thinking more of specific acts.
Go with that. Do that.
But I couldn't think of a specific act that was a mistake. Mm-hmm. But when you talk about that, there is I think my most adventurous sexual partner that I had the most sex with was supposed to be a one-night stand when I first met them. So that's... So it's in the same type of vein.
So perhaps at that time, I'm not going to say falling in love, but finding a place of wanting more ongoing commitment might have been, because that was unanticipated or undesired, a bit of a mistake, but then it turned out well.
It turned out very well.
Good.
Yes, I would say.
Good. Okay. So, so there's a little information for people who believe that you cannot possibly start an ongoing situation unless you do so with intentional friendship.
For sure. It can accidentally happen.
Yes, there we go. Okay, so the question for today's episode, would you like to say it or should I say it?
I think you should say it.
We could say it at the same time.
We could.
It would be symbolic.
Okay, yes.
All right, so on the count of 3, after 3, not on 3, because I have to say 3.
Understood.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. How do lesbians have sex? So this was posed to me, and I kind of made a little awkward laughter. Not because I felt awkward answering the question, because it would be such a long answer, which makes it a good question for the radio show, but a hard question to answer just in passing.
I think it would be either a really long answer or a really short answer that could feel rude to the person that asked.
Perhaps, or a comedically short answer.
Comedically short,
yeah,
yes.
Because I immediately thought of kind of the little thing that goes around social media, like it's a meme, but nobody's really using the image for other things. And it basically says, what's the difference between straight sex and lesbian sex? The answer, everybody has an orgasm for lesbian sex. So that's not necessarily true, nor is it true that straight people never also have everybody have orgasms. But that would be a comedically brief answer that's somewhat insulting. Yeah. I'm also tempted to say things like, very well, thank you, when this comes up. Yeah, so, but I think it's an important question to have an answer to out there, and I don't think anyone's obligated to answer it, but we're gonna try to address it. We're brave and bold. So Sarah, what's your first inclination for an answer to the question, how do lesbians have sex?
Well, my first inclination is of the shorter variety, which is pretty much the same way that straight people have sex, just nobody's worrying about the pleasure of a penis.
That's a lovely answer, but what if the traditional way that straight people are having sex is phallocentrically based upon the beginning of a penis penetrating a vagina and then sex ends when the penis ejaculates?
That's true, and I think maybe that speaks to the kind of sex I have with penises, because that's not what I think of as straight sex. So if that's what you're thinking of in your head is penis and vagina.
And phallocentric. The penis determines
yes.
the beginning of sex and the end of sex.
Then my answer would get a whole lot longer, suddenly. But my answer would also probably be not everyone has an orgasm, but I do think there are more orgasms.
There's definitely the potential for it.
It's also, everyone's a little more familiar, usually. I'm not talking about beginning, because everyone, straight sex, lesbians, fumbles in the beginning. Which
I sometimes liken to if you've ever painted your own toenails a bunch of times, and then you try to paint somebody else's. Like, you know how it goes, but you're like, whoa, I'm kind of uncoordinated with this.
Yes.
But then the more you do it, the better it gets.
The better you get.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an excellent analogy.
Thanks. So, when we're talking about how lesbians have sex, and the answer could talk about pleasure in the form of orgasms, but also I think you hinted at maybe a broader diversity of potential activities than the stereotypical, unfortunately all too common, what we might call phallocentric kind of sex that some straight people have. Too many straight people have. And I say too many, not that it's bad sex, but that as a professional who does therapy in this field and who gives workshops and does coaching in this field, I certainly meet plenty of folks who are having straight sex that don't want to be having it like this, but have not this phallocentric sex, but want to have a greater range of things and maybe include some of that kind of sex, but not have that be it, the end all and be all. Yeah, you were going to say something.
Well, I was also going to say, I think that goes back to, I remember learning about what sex was. I don't even know how old I was, but when you learn about what sex is, you learn about sex is a penis going inside a vagina. You don't learn about...
It's procreative sex.
Yes. You don't learn about enjoyment, the other things that can happen, the parts that don't involve the genitals, and you don't really hear about it not involving a penis.
Right. Yeah, and not only does it always involve genitals, it involves the genitals getting together with each other.
Yes.
Nothing else getting together with the genitals.
Nothing else getting together with the genitals.
So both of us went through sex education in the United States.
Yes.
At about the same period of time as each other. So I'm in my late 30s, so, we had about the same period of time that we would have done this. So this maybe is a bit generational for us. I don't actually know what sex ed looks like now. I think some places would be more progressive than what we got, and some places would be less, and many places would be the same in the United States.
I think that's accurate in the U.S.
Yeah, Canada has a different curriculum, but I don't actually know the nuts and bolts, as it were, of the discussions of pleasure and what constitutes sex in that, or if it just gets kind of plopped into class, if the kids are able to get a grasp of that. Because when sex ed started in public school, for me, I learned stuff, but I did not understand what I was learning. It was kind of rote repetition. I didn't get it.
Agreed.
I could repeat it, but I didn't get it. I was a slow kid in a lot of ways. That's okay. I turned out all right. So, yeah, we learned about reproductive sex. It happens when the penis enters the vagina. It ends after the penis ejaculates and loses its erection, and then sex is done.
And there is no talk of a female orgasm at all.
Right. Yes. What is that? That's another episode is what that is. And also there might have been mention about something called foreplay, which is the activities you do to get ready for sex, for intercourse. So that intercourse is comfortable and viable for everyone involved.
I think we learned about foreplay a little differently because for me, I remember foreplay being the dangerous thing that happens that might accidentally lead to sex.
Yeah, no, we were not too, so I learned in a private Catholic high school context. The sex ed in middle school was just hygiene, and like, oh no, periods, and this is going to be terrible, and interestingly enough, the girls went into the library and learned about periods and hygiene. The boys went into the playground and learned about dodgeball. That was middle school sex ed. So there you go, women as gatekeepers from the start. But anyway, so I got the Catholic version. So foreplay would not be something you engage in until you're married anyway. And It is distinctly to get your bodies to the place where you can hurry up and get to the penis and vagina part.
Right.
Kissing and making out would have been the dangerous, risky thing. That is a slippery, slippery slope straight to hell.
Straight to hell.
Straight to hell.
Yes. I was public school, so they came about as close to saying straight to hell as they could.
Straight to death of AIDS, perhaps.
Yes.
We had that fear factor put in a lot for us.
Absolutely, yes.
Which is, by the way, terribly offensive. I say that with a face that says that that's a ridiculous thing to say. But you can't see my face, thankfully, because it's radio. So this is this kind of stereotype of what sex is, and we've kind of taken it back to a place where I think, okay, I got an idea of where the stereotype comes from. But also I think that it's quite awkward for adults to discuss, for many adults anyway, to discuss a more well-rounded, less reproduction-based definition of sex with kids. Because when an adult talks about sex, it's with an adult sense of eroticism and carnality, whereas with a young person, it's just wherever their brain development is. And it's maybe more about curiosity or education. There may be elements of titillation if they go and think about that on their own at another time, but they're probably not feeling that with the adult. But we tend to get rather squeamish, in at least my culture, when it's anything about sexy times as opposed to just reproductive times.
Yes.
Conversation with youth in an educational tone, as though that's somehow safer and more respectful.
Yes, and I think we also, in the culture that I come from, are even more squeamish about someone who's not mom and dad having that conversation, because it's seen as inappropriate to talk about sex with a kid in any way, even if it's in an education system that's not for procreation.
So why would someone else want to do it? That's automatically creepy.
Yes.
And of course some creepy people would use that as an excuse. But, it's education all the same about our bodies and our interactions. Reminding people that you're listening to 93.3 FM, CFRU, if you're in the Guelph area. If you're not, you can be streaming us online at cfru.ca, Sexually Charged. You can also look us up on YouTube. Just Google Sexually Charged there, and you can find a bunch of our episodes. And if you have questions you want to ask us, you can email them to AskSC, that's the initials for Sexually Charged, at UOGuelph, GUELPH.ca, where the wonderful student interns at Student Wellness will receive your questions and forward some of them on to the radio show. They help us do background research and editing and all that great stuff, so we're super grateful for that collaboration with Student Wellness. So we're halfway in it, and we haven't actually described how lesbians have sex, so I think we should just go ahead and do that. We talked a little bit about perhaps the confusion or the assumptions of straight sex and things like that. So lesbian sex, as you said, is the kind of sex that pretty much anybody can have, for the most part. There's a couple of activities that would be difficult. And we also want to really couch this that often when I'm asked that, what people are asking are about two cisgendered women. So some of the activities we'll be talking about are making that assumption, and we want to make it really overt that you don't have to have a vulva or vagina to be a woman or to be a lesbian. And most of these activities will cross over between all genders, regardless of what category of sexuality you want to be in. And hopefully we can talk a little bit about what lesbian sex looks like if somebody is born with a penis and still has a penis, whatever they want to call it. So lesbian sex involves, all the making out and stuff like that anybody can do.
Yes.
And that's like kissing and open mouth kissing, tongue kissing, and all the massagey things you can do with hands and stuff like that. But things that are considered foreplay in the straight definition of sex are often more fleshed out, if I can use that term, in the queer definition of sex or lesbian definition of sex. So using your hands to stimulate your own or your partner's genitals can, whatever you want to call it, fingering, hand jobs, finger banging, whatever. All of that, yeah. That's sex.
That's sex.
And to me, when straight people do it, that's sex too, although they don't necessarily think of it that way. And perhaps maybe one of the differences is that for lesbians, that may or may not be the prelude to some other sort of penetrative activity. It might just be the goal of the evening to do that and enjoy that.
That might be where it stops or where it continues for a very long time and doesn't progress to any type of penetration because it doesn't need to progress.
Yes. And hands can also not just stimulate vulvas, they can stimulate anuses and breasts and chests and hair and all sorts of stuff like that too, just as they can for anybody. Mouths can go anywhere.
Mouths can go lots of ways.
Lots of ways. And that's anywhere from head to toe, front and back, all over the place. And it might not necessarily be considered foreplay. It might be considered sex.
It could.
Absolutely.
Well.
It is, by the way, called oral sex. Just putting that out there. Or analingus or any of that other bunch of words, depending on what you're doing. Sex toys might be involved.
Very possibly, they could.
Yep, anybody can use sex toys.
Anybody.
So those can be any toys or outie toys. Any is what I call penetrative toys, which could be anally, it could be vaginally. Sometimes folks wear strap-ons. So then we're getting more towards penetrative stuff that could look like P&V, or could be P&V.
Yes.
And that may be the thing that people are working towards, or it might just be part of the mix, or it may not be happening at all.
I would agree with all of that.
Okay. So what else could be considered lesbian sex? We've got hands, mouths, toys, and strap-ons.
Hands, mouths, toys, and strap-ons covers a lot of area.
What about bits on bits?
There are, in order to do bits on bits, you don't have to have a penis involved. And I think that's another thing that a lot of straight people think is, how do bits get on other bits? So one thing that can happen is scissoring.
Yes.
That's something. Also, two bits can be around a toy and together.
Yes.
Over those bits.
Share a toy.
Share a toy.
Yeah.
And you can share a toy simultaneously with your bits going towards bits.
Mm-hmm. So I think that I have no numbers about scissoring, but I think that bits on bits for people who both have vulvas is maybe not as common as bits on bits for heterosexual sex.
I would totally agree with that in my experience.
Yeah, like statistically speaking, it probably doesn't happen as frequently.
I think I've had it happen once.
Yeah,
it wasn't.
It's there's a learning curve.
I was gonna say at the time that it was kind of awkward.
Yes,
because it's not a super graceful fit until you work at it a little.
Should we try to describe what scissoring is over radio? Because every time I try to describe it, I use hand gestures or drawings.
I do too.
Okay, so you know how you make your hands so that your fingers are scissors going snip, 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 snip between your first and second finger? So do that with both of your hands and make it like a peace sign. Make 2 peace signs, one with each hand.
Yes.
And the peace sign is like a V, right? So the angle of the V, the pointy part of the V, put your hands together so that the pointy parts of the V's are touching each other, and your fingers are like straddling each hand. The fingers of one hand are straddling the other hand. And that is an example of what we're talking about by scissoring. And oftentimes to make this work, then you're holding hands with the other person and kind of rocking back and forth or getting emotion going. And that's, you really have to be able-bodied in certain ways and coordinated in certain ways. So it can be really hot for some people, and it's not even worth the effort to figure it out for other people. And for some people, it's just not hot at all. For others, they're like, why would I do that? It's also harder to do safer sex with that.
Like a lot of sex acts. Some people really enjoy it, and some people it's not their thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. But you can still hump and grind on each other in any number of positions. That's just kind of one grinding position that has a title.
And on many body parts. Grinding does not have to be genitals. It can be...
Yes. The infamous knee against the vulva. If you haven't learned that technique yet, you may wish to experiment and see if that is for you, if there's a vulva and a knee in your life.
That's exactly the one I was thinking of.
Yeah. Feet can be on genitals.
Feet can be on genitals?
You don't have to be a foot fetishist for that. It's a perfectly viable body part without having it be fetishized.
You can also... Feet can, knees can... You can have parts of arms that are, depending on where faces want to be.
You gestured at your upper arm.
I did.
And shoulder area.
I did.
Yeah.
Radio doesn't gestures don't show. There's a lot of different...
Yeah. You can be creative and involve stuffed animals. You can do whatever you want. And pretty much all of this is available to people of all genital types. So what makes it different for people in same-sex relationships? And I would... say that because you're already breaking some rules and you don't get access to all the information out there, you have to kind of invent the wheel yourself a bit and be willing to break rules of heteronormativity. And so perhaps that leads to greater allowance for creativity. This is not to say that all lesbians are creative, though.
No, you can have... Straight couples can have... I don't want to say boring sex, but...
Yeah, anybody can have boring sex.
Anybody can have boring sex.
Anybody can have boring sex. And, but something else I've noticed, and the research supports, the limited research out there supports, that same-sex couples of cis women, there's this stereotype around lesbian bed death. So that is, you stop having sex very early in the relationship, and the stereotype is shortly after moving in. And some interesting research has shown that the frequency of sex between 2 cisgender women may be less frequent, but there are more sex acts each time. So it may be that there's more time involved, more prep involved, more energy involved, so you don't need to or don't want to do it with the same kind of frequency as a bunch of quickies, which may or may not be how a heterosexual counterpart is having sex.
That's an excellent observation. I also...
Those moments of blushing and grinning.
So, well, the other thing is that I think in heterosexual sex, there's a stereotype, and sometimes the stereotype is true in a lot of relationships, where one person has an orgasm and the other one doesn't, and things can happen very quickly, and there also might just be... what am I trying to say? an easier recharge time or a continuation of being unfulfilled and wanting more. So, like,
Yes.
if I've had 7 orgasms, I might not feel unfulfilled and try and have sex again the next day to get more of them. I might be like,
I'm good for a bit.
I'm good.
I'm riding those chemicals for a while.
Right, but if I had sex for half an hour and I got turned on and it didn't go anywhere, then I might be like, I need to do...
Still charged up.
Yeah, still charged up.
You
and ready
are
for more.
whatever the equivalent of blue balls would be. You're blue-clitted, so there you
Yes.
go. If we think about heterosexual sex under the stereotype of being this procreative style, then it's built upon the assumption that you will have an orgasm and that she better get hers in there before that time is done. And so that may not necessarily be how same-sex sex works either, or how lesbian sex works.
Also, by the way, for anyone out there who's in a relationship like that, it doesn't have to be that way.
It does not have to be that way.
And you can still get yours after they're done.
Totally. And before as well.
And before as well.
Yes.
Both.
So there may also be differences in how it works because there's not that kind of social pressure time clock thing that we made up that doesn't really serve very many people well at all. And it may be, though, that the sex is very one-sided in cis woman sex because maybe one person is putting a lot of effort into the other and they're both tired and happy, and then the next time we'll reverse who puts effort into who. That can happen with any kind of sex, right?
Yes, it can.
Absolutely. But I think I hear about it more often in same-sex situations.
I would agree with that.
Either the straight folks aren't telling me about it, or it's not as statistically common. So if you were to have a closing thought on how lesbians have sex, how would you summarize all this? Would you have a different brief answer than you did before?
I don't know that I would have a different brief answer because I think it's important to differentiate the fact that when there is lesbian sex, it's not penis-centric, which so much sex is built up to be. But I do think that it's important to recognize that it is still sex, and I sometimes think that's the question that people are asking too, is like, when does it cross into sex?
Yes.
Like that, if it doesn't involve a penis, it's not sex. So I think that's something that I might tell people is that it's all sex.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there's so much more sex than you're thinking
so
of.
this is how do lesbians have sex? You would say, it's all sex. And
It's
then
all
just drop
sex,
the mic.
and then walk
and then
away.
You're done. I think for myself, I might say something like, how do lesbians have sex? And I'd say, not following the same script as straight sex. Making their own script up, whatever that might be. And that's probably a useless answer to most people, so I'm glad that we had the rest of the show to talk
Yes.
about it.
I think when people ask, they want the technical details because in their mind they're like, how do you do it without a penis?
Yeah, how do you get bits on bits? Because that's the narrow definition of sex. And how does that work?
Yes. But it's so much more.
So much more. For so much longer.
So delicious.
On that note, you've been listening to Sexually Charged Radio. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sarah. And I'm looking forward to doing more episodes with you.